Hello and welcome back to Rev Real Estate School. I'm your host, Michael Montgomery, and today what we're talking about is what you should say when you are following up with leads or clients. Now, this topic, although seemingly fairly simple, we're just following up, is actually quite challenging because if we've ever been in the position of following up with somebody, that reminder has came up in our CRM, but we just don't know what to say. We don't know what to say to them in order to A, elicit a response, and B, be valuable. Now, onto the second point here, this concept of being valuable, I think is an important one. And it's because oftentimes what we hear in real estate or in any sort of sales profession is when we're following up, we need to be providing value. Now, I totally agree with this sentiment. I definitely think we do need to be providing value, but the challenge is what exactly is value? What is valuable to the client or to the lead? And if we do agree that we should be providing value, which I'm sure we all do, how can we actually go about putting this into practice so that we are providing value to our clients? That's what we're going to jump into today, and we're going to look at a few different things that you can do in order to follow up so that you're doing so in a natural and authentic way while still being very effective. Let's dive in. The first one, and this is probably the main one that comes to all of our minds, and we don't think it's necessary, but in fact, it's extremely necessary and very impactful, and it's property matches. So what exactly are property matches? Well, basically, if you're a seller, you're sending them sales and listings or pendings. And if you're a buyer, you could be sending them the same, but you're more than likely sending them listings. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, this seems too obvious. And don't they all have access to different tools where they can look up their own properties? Yes. However, the fact that you're reaching out and you have a specific property that you want to share with them is A, valuable, and B, it's personal. You're showing some personal level of interaction with them. So at times in the past, I've been hesitant to send properties to buyers because I'm like, oh, they're a little bit early on in the buying stage. I won't send anything to them. But then as I progressed, all I would do is just through MLS is set myself up on an auto notification for properties that could fit for this buyer. And maybe they're already on an automated email list when they're actually receiving properties from me from MLS, but I'm still going to hand select a few. So I'll look at that list and I'll say, hey, did you see this one? This one really jumped out at me for you. Or conversely, on the selling side, if their neighbor goes up for sale or if something sells in their community, even if it's not overly comparable, I'll still share it with them. And then I will indicate why maybe it's not overly comparable. So when it comes to real estate and we think of value, what is it that most people want? Ultimately, what they're looking for are properties. So sellers want to know what their home's going to sell for, and buyers want options for them to buy. So by actually not providing them with properties or by trying to think through other kind of sneaky ways that we can be in touch with them, it's actually less impactful than just giving them what they're looking for, which is data on what homes are selling for and potential opportunities for buyers. Next, we have ask a question. This one is probably my favorite, and it's probably my favorite because this will create an increased bond between you and the client. Even without you or them knowing it, you're both going to feel closer because of it. So what you're going to do is you're simply going to ask that person a question. So this works very well if you have a potential upcoming seller. And let's say you have a seller in a certain community. All you're going to do is reach out to that seller and you're going to let them know you have a buyer looking in their community and just ask them for some things that they love about their community. Or maybe you have a buyer who's looking close to their community. Are there any really good shops, restaurants, coffee spots? Maybe you already know about them and then you can ask the seller if there's anything on top of this list that they would recommend. Maybe any hole in the wall places. So I love this one because it takes the conversation away from just real estate and starts to become more personalized. And as soon as we get more personal with our clients, there's a very high likelihood that we are going to convert that individual. Now, you don't just want to say this for the sake of saying it. Although that being said, theoretically, even if you didn't have a buyer in that community, by asking that question and then improving your knowledge set so when you do have a buyer in that community, it can be very effective. But almost always you're going to get a response from a seller or from a homeowner in these cases. And it turns into this nice personal conversation, and then they feel closer to you as a person. And then in fact, when it comes time for them to choose a realtor, it's a lot more challenging for them to choose a realtor that they don't have that personal connection with. So you already have an advantage. Asking questions can also work for buyers. So maybe they're renters, maybe they're also sellers as well. So asking questions about their community, asking questions about their job. So it could be the industry that they're in. This can also be very powerful. Or maybe they have dogs, so you're asking them questions about dogs. Or maybe your kids are a similar age, you're asking about kids and kids' activities. So it doesn't just necessarily have to be isolated to their community, but asking them questions is a fantastic way to strengthen that bond. Moving on, we have triggers. Now, if you haven't heard of triggers, what triggers are things that are important to that individual. So this kind of starts to move close to that previous topic of ask them a question. But a trigger is about a personal interest of theirs. Maybe they like hiking, maybe they like sports, maybe they like cooking, maybe they like yoga, maybe they like reading, whatever that might be. You should have a spot in your CRM for things that are of interest to your clients. So we call these triggers. And we want to have a field within our CRM for this so that when that person pops up for us to follow up with them, we can look at their triggers and see if there's anything of interest. So for example, if they liked hiking, we can reach out to them again with a question and ask them if there's any great hikes that they've been on, or saying that you're going for a hike in a given community. In fact, we just had this recently. We had a client who moved out to a specific area, beautiful nature area, and then we asked them if there's any spots around there that they would suggest we go on walks and hikes. And A, it allowed us to connect with them, but B, we also end up getting some really good information. So triggers are this really important concept. These are important things to our clients. And again, we're trying to create a bridge between real estate and into the personal. Because as soon as we get into that personal side, this is when referrals will really start to flow. Before that, they can flow, but they're not going to flow as quickly. As soon as we're more into the personal side, at that point in time, you will see referrals start to increase. So triggers and anything related to triggers, so these are interests of theirs, are extremely valuable when we're following up. Next, we have connections. And connections are a two-way street. What I mean by that is that sometimes we are reaching out to them for a connection, but more frequently, we are sending connections their way. So what do I mean by this? Well, the most obvious example is, say, a lender. So we're connecting a buyer with a lender. That's a really obvious use case of a connection. And that connection, therefore, being somebody who has something of value to provide to our clients, which in this case would be a mortgage. Now that tends to be the kind of the first place that our mind goes when we think of connecting our clients with somebody. But there's other sources of connections that we tend to not leverage that much, but can be very effective. For example, connecting a first-time home buyer with a home inspector so that they can have a quick 20-minute call about what is all covered in a home inspection. Yes, you can go through this, but you can also connect them with a home inspector. Now, as soon as you have this triangle relationship between you, client, and home inspector, or you, client, and third party, as soon as that occurs, at that point in time, you now have a stronger bond. So very similar to asking questions or discussing triggers, when we're making connections, we're solidifying the bond between us and the client. So do not be shy about making connections or asking them if they'd like connections. Now, home inspections can be one. Maybe there's some other sort of inspection that you get in your market that is really worthwhile them discussing with. Maybe it's attorney. It's very likely a mortgage broker. Maybe it's a home stager. Maybe it's a designer. Maybe it's an architect. Maybe it's a plumber. Maybe it's an electrician. All sorts of things related to homes and home buying can be extremely valuable connections. And then, of course, on the other side is we can reach out to them and ask them for a connection. So we can ask them if they have a painter. Say you lost your painter moved away. We wouldn't want to say you lost your painter because that could have other sorts of impacts. So instead we say your painter moved away. Let's use that example. So your painter moved away, so you're looking for a new painter. And so for that reason, you're reaching out to people within your network. So that's you now seeking out a connection. It's equally as valuable because now they're offering something of value to you, and that again strengthens the bond. Moving on to the next one. We have knowledge. Now, knowledge is this concept that we oftentimes will go to. So we think of how can we help their experience by way of how can we help them, teach them something, help them learn something that they didn't know before. So this is very common when it comes to a new home buyer. So if they're a first-time home buyer and they need to understand deposits, earnest money, or how actually the whole flow of the transaction works, that can be an extremely valuable bit of knowledge. But here's the thing, is if we're providing knowledge where it's not applicable, at that point in time, it feels very contrived and not very authentic. So we have to be very clear about what sort of knowledge that we're imparting. So if we're just sending off, mortgage rates to a seller, maybe there's some applicability there, but generally not. And so we need to be ensuring that what we're sending to people is valuable to them. Now, in almost all cases, what's valuable to people is what's happening in the market, especially when we start to think about what does the future of the market hold. Now, although none of us can predict the future of the market, we probably all have a point of view on this. And we've spoken about this concept before, this concept of the spiky point of view. So, this point of view that is both somewhat surprising and actually quite true. So, all of us probably have a perspective on what our market's going to look like in the next 3 months. And that should be supported by data. So, if you have a perspective on what you think is going to happen, and then you're able to actually send this off to your clients, that is fantastic. Now, this is something that you can reuse. So when it comes to market knowledge, potentially what you're doing, you're recording a quick video, less than a minute ideally, and then you can kind of rinse and repeat this. So anyone who's in your follow-up list for that month can basically get this quick video of you explaining what's happening in the market and where the market is going. I know that this sounds like, hey, it's something that everybody does, market updates. This isn't anything new. However, when it's sent by way of a video email and when it's personalized to them, it actually goes a long way. Now, if you don't have a huge client list, I would make these direct and personalized. So I wouldn't just do a general one for my city. I would say, I know you're looking at X community. Here's what we saw over the last month. Here's my predictions on what we could see in future months. And here's what's going on with inventory and sales, specifically in your community. Now, if you are dealing with a smaller or growing group of clients, that is a really good way to follow up. Moving along, we have appreciation and gifts. So gifts are very, very nice. They're very nice to receive. However, we don't want them to come across as being overly salesy. We want them to kind of naturally be part of our flow. And so the best approach to this depends on the number of clients you're working with. If you have a large database, then basically what we should be doing is we should be doing systematized pop buys. And again, we don't necessarily have to be popping by actually going to their house. We should be having something delivered, especially if we have a large network and a large database. However, if it's smaller and we're able to do this on more of a personalized one-to-one basis, you should do this, and you should do this a couple of times a year. So when it comes to appreciation and gifts, whether it falls into a traditional pop buy or whether you want to do some sort of small gift for that individual is up to you. But the first place our minds tend to go when we think about appreciation and gifts is we think of cost. So one thing that I would suggest is if cost is an issue, understand the power of a handwritten card is equally as valuable, even more valuable in some cases, than getting some small gift. Actually, a heartfelt note that is showing some level of appreciation goes a very long way. So don't think you have to come up with some elaborate gift-giving strategy in this case. Appreciation and gifts, the first part of that is appreciation, and that can be done by way of a handwritten note. And those go an extremely long way. They're a great way to follow up with leads. And finally, we've left this one for the last for a reason. And it's because it's least important, and it is the check-in or the follow-up. So when it comes to sending these emails, what I really try to avoid in my messaging is the words just following up. Because oftentimes that's where our minds go with these emails and text messages. Hey, I'm just following up, seeing where you're at with your home search or with your home sale. And if I force myself, I'm not always perfect about this. It will find its way into my emails. But if I try to force myself to not use the words just following up or just checking in, then ultimately my mind starts to go to different places. I become more creative about what it is that I am sending to them. However, there are times where I've sent market reports. Maybe they've received a gift recently. Maybe I've already done something about triggers or asked them a question and sent them some properties. So then I'm just going to follow up. So just following up, there's actually nothing really wrong with this. It's just the frequency at which most agents do it. Every single email tends to be a follow-up email. When if we start to integrate all of these other things, and then we start to mix in the odd follow-up email, we're going to be in a good place. But ultimately, all of this comes down to one thing, which is following up. And following up, as we all know, is where the majority of the money will be in real estate. And what I've struggled with is I haven't followed up with certain people simply because I didn't know what to say. So this episode should give you lots of ideas to go out there and start following up with leads and clients. Thank you very much. And remember, you can reach out anytime at revrealestateschool.com, or I'm on Instagram at the.michael.montgomery. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next lesson.